welcome to another episode of Ask a Pianist. My name is Andrew Aarons, and today we'll be looking at some Preludes and Fugues from Book 1 of the Well-Tempered Clavier by Bach, specifically focusing on a concept of technique which has always been something of a risk factor when it comes to neglect. Due to the ease of having a damper pedal that can hold notes for us, there is a tendency, especially if one has been working on a lot of romantic repertoire, to use the pedal for this reason in pieces that either do not require it, or even in pieces where the possibility wasn't an option on original instruments. Bach's fugues present us with many problems, none the least of which is holding notes in one voice over or under moving phrases in other voices. On instruments like the harpsichord or organ, performers had to physically hold notes that required being held, and the works were written with this in mind. If a note couldn't be held by a finger in the texture, then Bach would normally write around this issue. As a rule, I would always encourage, and eventually order, a student to learn their fugues without pedal. In this episode of Ask a Pianist, I'm going to show you why. The first reason to do this comes from an obvious textural problem we can encounter if we use pedal instead of holding notes with our fingers. Quite often in Bach's output, you'll find him holding long notes over scales or running figures, and if you use pedal to hold the note for convenience sake, the running figures are blurred into a mess. His E-flat major Prelude and Fugue exhibits quite a lot of this. The opening of the prelude essentially says it all. This cannot be played by holding the long notes with pedal, because then you get a result that is not clear at all. This issue gets more complicated when the fast second fugal section of the prelude begins. The counterpoint figure moves as a scale, and thus there are so many non-chord notes involved that any use of the pedal to hold long notes over the counterpoint would result in automatic blurring, just like in the opening. sense, this is actually a very good thing, as it forces the performer to find creative solutions to the fingering problems that are in this piece. But what happens when we find areas where the running notes constitute chord notes that actually reinforce the held note instead of contradicting it? In the three-voice fugue that accompanies this prelude, there are many areas where one may consider using pedal because the running figures are essentially broken chords, and if pedaled, would not create dissonance or blurring. Consider this passage, first without pedal. If we add pedal, the results are not too problematic harmonically. This texture is used quite often in this fugue, and the results are always the same if we use pedal. It's not precise in terms of acoustic voice leading, but it's not offensive either. What we have is a situation, reasonably rare in fast Bach, in which we can use the pedal to create different colors of sound and enlarge our dynamic range and palette. This obviously comes at a cost. We sacrifice clarity of counterpoint for the sake of increased variety in sound. Let's talk about this a bit. The greatest strength of the piano is its capability of presenting several individual and clearly delineated moving voices at once to an audience. Its greatest weakness is perhaps its rather uniform sound palette, which relies upon subtle changes in sound color in order to generate interest to a listener's ear. This is why playing Bach becomes such an interesting challenge. Bach gives us music that will communicate on many different levels. If played solely as pure pitch counterpoint, the music has expressive power. If played with a pseudo-romantic aesthetic style, where every harmony and gesture is exaggerated, the music still communicates, and rather powerfully if it's in the right hands. But each approach requires the sacrifice of an interpretative element that can contribute positively to a performance, and it is this sacrifice that we must balance when we're creating our interpretation. Is it more important to present something that is interesting by counterpoint, or interesting by sound effect? Consider the E major fugue from Book 1. This piece is reliant on a running theme with held notes around it in order to maintain transparency. We could play this in a completely neutral fashion in terms of dynamics or infused change, and it would still communicate due to the strength of the harmonic decisions and construction. In this case, the most important aspect to communicate to the audience is how fast notes and slow notes work together and interact. To use pedal in any of this is risky at best, and though it can be done, it leads to false harmonies. Thus, learning this fugue without using the pedal is a distinct advantage, because it allows you to add pedal in small places if you feel like it, but you're not required to use pedal in order to get all the notes to hold. This is not to say that using pedal is a terrible thing as a rule. It should be used in fugal playing to contribute to the sound quality or aesthetic ideal, completely divorced from the technical act of playing and holding all the notes. In the A-flat major fugue, there are lots of notes to be held, but given the style of the music, there's a definite opportunity to use the pedal without obscuring the clarity of the counterpoint. Given the tempo I have chosen, the running notes in the piece can sustain a two-note pedal, shifting on every eighth. This works because it is consistent with a common Baroque slurring technique, that of slurring two side-by-side notes on the beat in order to form an expressive gesture. However, doing a four-note pedal slur becomes problematic because there's too much conflicting sound. Shifting on every quarter is not really possible. The kind of pedaling which would help us the most, perhaps, would be the length of a half bar. In bar 8, we have to hold notes of the inner voice of the right hand as half notes. The actual distribution is too wide for the right hand to handle alone for most pianists. So, the tendency would be to hold this via pedal. This isn't ideal because of how the left hand is moving. And it doesn't allow control for the release of the long notes either. Here, we must play the first inner voice with the right hand, and play the next one with the left. That's the only way we'll have full control. And then we can add pedal if we feel like. It's a simple premise, really. Learn the piece without pedal, so that pedal can be freely added later on. Now, Let's have a look at a few places where the solution to hold the notes using our fingers can produce problems, either because the note simply dies too quickly, or we can't stretch the distance. The A minor fugue possesses both of these problems. The first, where the note dies too quickly, occurs in the middle. First I'll play it as written. Pay attention to the left hand when it strikes a long E octave in the bass and holds it for a bar and a half. In this case, the E's die rather quickly, even if struck hard, and the continuous movement in the right hand forces us to avoid using pedal to help sustain the bass. One solution, which is prevalent in harpsichord performance, is to replay the octaves at some point during the section. Originally, we have this. But since the octaves disappear so rapidly, we can replay them every half bar. What you're looking to do is keep the resonance vibrating without interfering in the rhythmic scheme, and thus provide a harmony which can coincide and clash with the upper voices. A simple solution, but one which must be considered seriously in a piece like this. A more vexing problem is that of not being able to hold a note physically at all. At the end of this fugue, there is a low A which can be played physically once in a while, but absolutely cannot be held for its entire length. What is not clear to the listener is that this low A is supposed to last from here all the way until the end of the piece. In the last bars, our hands are entirely tied up playing other notes. So, the solution here is to use the sostenuto pedal for the A so that it can hold it for us. This is only one half of the solution, of course. We have to find a place where we can engage the sostenuto without holding any other notes on as well. Since there is continuous playing from the onset of the A, we have to engage the sostenuto between played notes above, which is treacherous but not impossible. A nice place I have found is just before the new bar begins. If played slowly, we have this, and given the articulation I choose to play here, an opportunity arises. So, what we'll do is engage the sostenuto just before the change of the bar, like this. And then we're free. In real time, we get something like this. We must never forget that we're playing on an instrument that didn't exist in its current format in Bach's time. This doesn't mean that we can't use this modern instrument to its fullest extent, but it does mean that we have to understand that using this instrument may conflict with auditory expectations that the composer may have had in mind at the time of writing. The assumption existed that notes were held by the fingers to their full length. This is non-negotiable when playing the organ, clavichord, or harpsichord. But this also facilitated clear counterpoint at all times, which one could argue, given the aesthetic, was also a non-negotiable performance style. As long as we keep these issues intact, clear counterpoint, and holding the notes for full length, then we can add anything we want from the modern performance lexicon. But removing these issues by using the pedal to make things easier to play is a clear mistake, because it shows that the performer misunderstands or ignores crucial aesthetic elements that make this music function. So, that's it for this episode of Ask a Pianist. Until next time, keep practicing, and please, please, please learn your fugues without pedal first. You'll thank me later on. Bye for now.